The Sustainable Voice, bringing you big successes from small places worldwide.
Hey Leigh, welcome back. How are you?
I am great. The sun is shining. I got to see the aurora borealis in
You
South
did see
Carolina
it.
last night. I did.
Okay.
It was my camera caught it more than my eyes, but yeah, it was beautiful. So
I am
all
hoping we get
good.
to see it here in Florida. I mean, the skies, it's been still a bit overcast here. We got very lucky, obviously, with Milton coming in. As of this
Mm,
recording, massive hurricane Milton had come across the state and obviously had devastated the western coast. We it was definitely more than we thought. We ended up getting tornadoes here. I know that obviously Helene wreaked havoc in your area.
mm-hmm.
It seems like these hurricanes are just becoming more and more unpredictable. They're getting bigger, or just more powerful.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, every answer is becoming politicized now. Anytime somebody mentions climate change, that becomes a political football. Anytime
Yeah.
somebody mentions warming waters, and so we are where we are, right? Remove all of that. Nobody can deny the storm is big and powerful.
Mm-hmm.
There were I saw a stat. I have this image between 3 p.m. no 2:30 p.m. and 6 p.m. there were 124 tornado warnings in the state, and there's a map that shows the cluster, and we got in our area in the span of 3 hours 7 tornado warnings, just subsequent, just one after the other, one
Wow.
after the other, one after the other, and then obviously some touchdown. So it was, yeah, it was something.
It's
Yeah.
crazy. It really it made me think a lot and reflect after all this about, I think this ties into our topic today, but like your sense of place and what is yours and like what happens when it's not yours
Right,
anymore. I mean, like
right.
I've really been deep in thinking about that, and especially people in the North Carolina mountains. But even here at home, what happens when what you thought was your place is not your
Is
place
no longer
anymore,
yours.
is no
Yeah,
longer yours.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
um and we're just so lucky here, primarily in the US, that in
Hmm.
first world countries, that we don't that's not an issue for us. But
That's right.
yeah, it
That's right.
really has raised my awareness. So our topic today is timely.
It 100% is. I mean,
Hmm.
you're spot on. I mean, we've talked about this. We've talked about, clean water becoming politicized.
Hmm.
We've talking about, the fact that the waters in the Gulf, the temperatures went down by 13 degrees after this storm, both storms went through. The fact that we can see aurora borealis right now, the fact the skies, I mean, right now it's overcast, but do you see it's sunny probably where you are. Do you
Yeah.
see a cloud in the sky, or does it feel like the earth that it was like the weather was just cleansed?
Oh,
Uh,
that is totally like last night. It felt like this renewal and rebirth outside.
yeah.
There were frogs and crickets in the sky, and it was
Mm-hmm.
crisp. And it felt like I couldn't believe 2 weeks ago today what we were in the middle of.
Yep.
And there was just this lifting in my spirit, and just in the
Mhm.
earth and everything. Yeah.
You'll appreciate this. So we brought all of our plants in, obviously, and
Mm.
apparently a snake had hitched a ride on one of our plants. It stayed
That
in
is
the
my worst
plant.
nightmare.
It
It
stayed
stayed
in
in
the
the
plant.
plant.
It stayed in the plant. It never went anywhere. It stayed in the plant. And so when I came out, I went to go pick up the plant. I saw it, and it was a harmless snake. And I saw it. I mean, like I've had a baby cobra in my laundry in Kenya. So I mean, this is nothing. Not that I'm really a big fan of snakes anyway, but I mean, it just talking. So I put the pot out, just gently, and the snake just went off on his own, and that was all right. I remember I sent a video to my wife, and she goes, "Where was that snake?" It was out in the lawn. "Where was it before?" I go, "Don't ask questions you won't like the answer to."
So I have a similar story real quick I have to tell you. So I have a rental house
uh,
in the area, and her power was out for quite a while. And
yeah,
so I was over there the other day. I happened to be over there when they flipped her power back on. She was at
yeah,
work. She asked me to go in the house and
yeah.
check on her house. So I went in to check on it and opened the door, and who's staring at me? A squirrel. A squirrel had gone down her chimney. She had texted me the night before, and she said, "I think I got it out." She's a
Yeah,
911 operator, and she'd called her fire department friends to kind of help her. Anyway, no, she slept in the house with the squirrel all night. She
yeah,
didn't know
yeah.
it, and there he was. So
My wife slept in the house with a snake the whole night.
I'd take a
Yeah.
squirrel over a snake. I mean, that is my worst
Oh,
nightmare.
it was when I
Yeah.
did tell her the snake was in the house. I mean, I don't know what was funnier, the fact that I told her or the fact that the color was draining out of her face as I told her,
Mm-hmm.
even though the snake wasn't in the house anymore. At
Yeah.
one point, I had to remind her, I go, you do know I'm from Africa, right? So, so,
Well, I've been told that we're never more than something like 3 feet away from a spider ever.
mm-hmm. Oh,
So,
100%. 100%.
yeah.
I mean, that's exactly right. So yeah, I mean, so there's there, but it actually brings us to, again, it's related to this topic today because we're talking about whose land is it anyway,
Mm-hmm.
right? And this is something that you and I have had conversations about this. We've had conversations about indigenous land. Are there any in your travels around the world, when you were at the Coast Guard or in general, have you ever been someplace where indigenous people were where their land was being threatened? I mean, I know look, Native Americans obviously come to mind right away at home.
Mm-hmm.
But when you start talking about overseas, have you ever encountered that in any place you've gone
You
to?
know, the place that was so profound for me was the Copper Canyon in Mexico.
Hmm.
And being there and seeing their way of life, but also, being in a lodge and being transported there by a train and trying to understand like how their, what protections do they have for their way of life
Right.
and how they're adapting. And that was probably, you know, the most in my face, just because they
Mm,
they still live this really ancient lifestyle.
that's it. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
100%. And
Mm-hmm.
likewise, I mean, I've had experience obviously going in different communities and talking to people, and then you see how they live. And I'm not talking about communities that are set for tourism. I'm talking about the
Mm-hmm.
rightful owners of the land. And what ends up happening is it's not that, okay, well, the question is whose land is it anyway, right? And what ends up happening is, again, the topic becomes a political football.
Mm-hmm.
For example, right now, specifically, we're talking about the pastoral Maasai in Tanzania. These are the Maasai that live in the Ngorongoro Highlands, and their land is under threat. Every single article you read will talk about the government is taking their land away from them. It's doing this. And maybe this is the unpopular opinion, but I'm the one who's saying there's enough blame to go around to everybody. It's not just on the government. I mean, why would a government reliant on tourism go to people and say, all right, you know what, the land's not yours anymore, it's ours? That's There's no way that happens. I mean, again, I shouldn't say no way. It does happen in
Mm-hmm.
many parts of the world. But in Tanzania, I know this because I've actually met the president of Tanzania. I've had a conversation with her. I've talked to her about this. She's from Zanzibar. She understands how tourism works. And she and I have had in-depth conversations through her people and whatnot. And I was in the country when she was inaugurated. And
Mm-hmm.
when her inauguration speech, one of the things that she talked about was the fact that, she talked about the fact that she must always, she talked about, she goes, I must always remember that there are two sides to this country and I have to bring them together. Something like that.
Mm-hmm.
It was a very profound speech considering she was the first female president in the history of the country.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So it was again, and she was inaugurated during the pandemic when her predecessor passed away through what he thought wasn't COVID, but really probably was COVID.
Oh, right. We
He
talked
he
about
was the
that. Yeah, I
guy that was
remember
talking
that.
about drinking, hot tea and lemon.
Right.
Yeah, that was him. So I was in the country when nobody could find him, and then when she was inaugurated, and it was just, it just there's more to meets the eye. So I thought this was an important topic for us to talk about here because when we start talking about indigenous people and their land being taken away, quite often we look for who the villain is.
Mm-hmm.
We look at the story and say, all right, who's to blame here, right? Who's the villain? Who's this? For example, if there's a homeless person on the street and we all want to give that person money, right? We all want to help that person get up. Most of us, right? We for the
Mm-hmm.
most part, we all do.
Yeah.
But then there's something in the back of your head saying, is this person going to use that money for drugs? Is this person
Mm-hmm.
going to use that
Oh,
money for
yeah.
booze? Is that person going to use that money for something else? And then you end up walking past them and not giving them anything because the devil in the details you don't know is greater than the devil in the details you do know.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so
That's
all of
true.
us, yeah. So all of a sudden you just back off. Well, what if it doesn't have to be like that? Right? I think that we have to re-engineer how we look at problems instead of we're always so quick to cast a villain on something, right? And sometimes they are villains, right? They are, but we
Right.
jump we jump that gun. We jump there before anybody else allows us to. And that's, I think, what's happening here.
Right. I had my finger pointed. I'm ready to I'm ready to get upset and blame someone just during this conversation. So I'm curious about your what is really going on.
If I get this right, you'll understand. If I get this wrong, you're gonna end up pointing the finger at me. So back in the 60s, these pastoral Maasai lived in the Serengeti. They lived basically along the lines of the Serengeti, and they were moved from there to the Ngorongoro Conservation Area. So these pastoral Maasai that are there, and obviously as tourism has gone up, the requirements of land has also gone up. And that's the part that the media talks about. Well, tourism bad. They're bringing in so many people, so these people are kicking off their land. Or not so quite, not so easy, not so fast. Hold on. If you take a step back, in addition, this is what happens every time. In addition to the requirement for more land for whatever the country is required for, whether it's mining, whether it's tourism, whatever the case, there is also population growth within the community. Look at Native Americans in the US and Native communities in Canada, for example, right? We want them to be able to grow their populations, right? That's their right to, otherwise you're talking about losing whole cultures, right? And I don't pretend to know everything about that, but I speaking of just my own dialect, right? My own indigenous dialect for our family, I would want to pass on that dialect so it doesn't get lost. Now, mine's not in danger of leaving, but some of these people it is because they don't speak Swahili. They speak Ma, or they speak other languages, but they are specific in the types of language that they speak. And we don't want that dialect to go. So within controls, yes, within reasons, of course, but their population growth has also required more land. So they've expanded their community for it to occupy more land. Now you're dealing with the human wildlife conflict that's shown up as well. For many people don't know that the biggest threat for the Maasai are lions. Lions hunt their livestock. And when you look at lion populations decreasing certain places, because they're hunted, but they're not being hunted because of sport. They're being hunted in self-defense.
That's interesting.
In fact, there's a great TED talk years ago, a guy named Richard Turere. He was 13 years old when he gave this TED talk, and at 13 or 14, and it was about using an LED flashlight that he tore apart to simulate a moving light to keep lions out of his community, which I thought was amazing. So back to this, the question at hand, it's not just, hey, you're taking my land. It's, I also need more land. The community also needs more land. The conservation area needs more land. Now you're at an impasse, and the controls there were controls that could have been set in place in the very beginning to prevent this from happening. And they were never set in place. Right? Foresight. I mean, hindsight's 2020. So we talk about foresight now, right? But it's controls that could have been put in place. But yet you look at any article, and I remember I talked to the one particular journalist. He's an amazing writer, and I had a long conversation with him because he was asking me about this. He said, how would you present this? And I explained to him, I said, the answer is not so simple, because the question isn't that simple either. Right? The question is not, well, why are you losing their land? Why are you taking their land? That's not the question. The question is, how did we get here in the first place? How did we get to this place where indigenous communities' land is being threatened? How did this happen? Right? What are the things that were missed? Instead, we're jumping to, why are you taking their land? Latest article is their voting rights are being removed. Why are you taking away their voting rights? Hold on. It's not that simple. Because the land's in territorial dispute, it's no longer recognized as part of the community. That's happens anywhere in the world. Imagine in the U.S., let's say, for example, the people of Texas decide to secede from the Union. Let's just say, for example, okay? I mean, let's just
they probably would be happy with that.
They'd be happy with that. They'd be happy with that. So let's just say, well, all right, for Cowboys fans, you can take the team with you. Go. Yes, I said that out loud. You can have them. So, but my point is that let's say they seceded from the Union, or let's say there was some sort and let's say there was some sort of an impasse where the U.S. is saying Texas is part of the U.S. and let's say the indigenous community is saying, no, we're sovereign land. Let's just say, for example, okay? Not quite the same thing, but close to it, okay? If you are now counting votes for an election, do you count the delegates in that disputed territory? because it's considered disputed now, right? The US says that it's part of our union. Texas, the indigenous people of Texas are saying, no, we're a separate union. We have seceded. We're not part of it. Do you then count the votes? Right? What if there's a
Yeah,
stretch?
that's interesting.
What if there's a stretch of land in between that you're not sure who owns, which is what's happening between the Pastoral Maasai and the government? What if there's a parcel of land that nobody knows who owns? That's what happens around the world. The people of Kashmir, people in Gaza, people in you name it, right? The Falkland Islands. Do you still count their votes? Do you still recognize their right to vote if they're not part of a union? Disputed. That's what's happening with the Maasai. But yet the articles all talk about, well, the rights to vote are being taken away. Hold on. That's not what's happening. Is it part of it? Sure. But that's not what's happening.
So is there anyone out there that's trying to champion this, or who is
No, you know
raising these questions and
no. I mean, I shouldn't say no. I'm sure there are.
I mean, you are, but
I am, but
someone there.
I'm sure there are. Well, this is the part that disappointed me, right? So when that writer wrote this article, and again, I respect him a lot because he wrote this article, there were a couple of people in Tanzania who could have spoken at detail about this, and they chose not to be named.
Why?
Why? Exactly. You're not fixing the problem. I put our name out there. I put my name out there and said, this is what I believe, right? You don't have to agree with me, right? Anybody listening to this podcast, you don't agree with me? Cool. Turn it off. No problem. Turn it off. No problem. You won't hurt my feelings. But I'm not going to take us to a middle ground, right? You and I are both going to talk about what we believe.
Right.
And we believe in a lot of the same things. So that part's there. But here, we're not asking the right question. We keep asking about, well, why is their land being taken away? That's not the right question. It's how did we get here? Why has this happened? How did we get here? That's the right question. How did this happen? There are controls in place about disputed land when it comes to communities that are common practice in many countries in Africa. They're in practice in many countries in Latin America. They are in practice in many countries in Asia. Not everywhere, but they are in practice in specific areas. The Northern Regions Trust in Kenya, for example. There are others, or in parts of Namibia, for example. There are places where this is recognized. Right? There are places where there's a solution. We'll talk about that in the next episode. However, we need to reprogram our minds, right? And I tell you this, these articles came out. I was getting emails after emails and calls after calls saying, could you please weigh in here? What for? And my answer to all of them is, I'm happy to weigh in, but you're asking the wrong question.
How current is this issue? When
Right
did this
now,
bubble up?
Well, it's happening right now. It's happening
Yeah.
right now. It's as of this recording, it's happening right now. So
Okay.
it's been around for 5 decades.
Okay.
Actually longer than that, probably
But it's
6.
bubbling up right now and really being
Yes. So the
an issue.
Ngorongoro crater area, it used to be, to go into the crater, you'd have to go down this 45-degree ingress on dirt roads, and if you weren't careful, you get stuck. Now that road's paved. So there's clearly a greater need, and obviously the Ngorongoro crater is very, very, what's the word I'm looking for? It's very what's the word I'm looking for? I forgot the word.
Is it rough? It's
Popular.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
Yeah. So it is like there's a lot of people who go there, and it is heavily trafficked, unfortunately. So I mean that's a separate topic altogether, as to how trafficked it is.
Yeah.
But it is popular. And the conservation area could be doing a better job of controlling how many people are going in. They could be doing a better job of trying to limit the access to protect the wildlife. But what's happening is you got encroachment within now the Maasai land. And the Maasai land, they need more land because the population has grown. And you're at an impasse right now where these two different bodies are trying to figure out whose land it is. Right. And the Maasai are saying, this is our sovereign land. You moved us once before. Why are you going to move us again? Well, you can't move us again. How are you going to move us again? Oh, by the way, we need more land. And the conservation area is saying, well, this is the national park. It's a conservation. It's basically for tourism. It's designated. It's a UNESCO World Heritage Site. It's all these things. Oh, by the way, we need more land.
Mm. So is there an overlap right now between the Maasai land and the conservation land? And was it always that way?
It wasn't. It
Okay.
wasn't. It became that way because of needs, and whether it's lack of documentation, whether it is just, random population growth, and this isn't about limiting land, right?
Mm-hmm.
Every indigenous community, it's their land. It always has been their land,
Mm-hmm.
right? Just like the animals, it's their land. But there has to be a control in place. There has to be some sort of a control in place. When you look at some of these controls, there are countries in South America, for example, where they will actually, let's say somebody wants to build a house somewhere, right, in a particular country. They will go and pay whoever wants the house will go and pay squatters to come and live on that land and just make a complete, absolute mess, right? Just a disgusting mess there. And then they'll show up and tell whoever owns the land, the government in this case, and say, you know what, we can fix this land for you. We can clean everything up. We can do everything else. But in return, can you give me rights to this land? I'd like to be able to buy this land. Either you're buying it dirt cheap or you're just getting it, but you're paying the squatter a set amount of money to take this land. And all of a sudden you built this mega mansion or this nice, big, beautiful house on land that you actually didn't pay full price for or didn't pay for at all. So
Mm.
there are probably 100 million different ways that land is being taken, that where land is being taken from people, right? Whether it's the system being gamed, whether it's what I just described to you,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's a conflict where the land is overlapping because of population growth and needs growth, but all of them have one common solution. There's a formula that we'll talk about in the next episode that hasn't been put in play. It's an easy formula. It's one that's being used in Australia, in the Blue Mountains. It's one that's being used in parts of Kenya. It's not being used here, and it could have
Mm.
eliminated this entire problem. And here's the part that's very important is that we're talking about the pastoral Maasai right now. The only difference between them and the other communities is they're getting the news coverage. You don't think this doesn't happen other places as well? They're just not getting the coverage, but it's happening everywhere, not just in Tanzania, but all sorts of countries. It's happening
Mm-hmm.
everywhere,
Yeah.
right? Take a look at
Yeah.
Botswana. Botswana just reintroduced hunting last year into the country. Again, separate topic about hunting in the country. That's a separate topic. So again, there's one, right? I'm not for hunting at all when it comes to that as well. But right again, right, we're assigning. I remember I had this conversation, assigning blame to the Botswana government. How could you? You guys are horrible, and you bad. All valid arguments.
Right.
But the flip side, almost every camp in Botswana is owned by a foreign entity. The money doesn't stay in the country. When they
Mm.
banned hunting, and I'm not a proponent for it. I want to make that very clear. Anybody's going to hear a soundbite here is going to say, "Well, you're for hunting." No, I'm not. I don't own a gun. I don't believe in hunting, but that doesn't mean I'm imposing my will on other people, right?
Right. That's
But it
important.
does right. But it does mean here that there's an underlying issue of the fact that the profits of those revenues are not staying in the country. And if you're going to ban something like hunting, you better have a process in place to be able to replace those jobs, that revenue with something else. And they didn't. Again,
Mm.
easy formula. If you're going to start moving people, indigenous communities off of land, you better have a system in place, some sort of formula to protect that land, not just for them, but for their ancestors. Right? I mean,
That requires a lot of effort and forethought and commitment to, you
that's
know,
why I'm announcing
humanity.
that's why I'm announcing that our candidacy for president of the United States, you and I both were running. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. I'm just
Not
kidding.
me.
I'm just kidding.
No.
Nope. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding.
But it does. I mean, it requires and yes, it requires a certain kind of person and mindset to be
Yeah.
able to be compassionate that way. I mean, I look even just bringing this right back to home, right where I live, all the land that was family farmland that's being sold and in some cases to foreign entities to build cracker box houses all
Mm-hmm.
around us, and we're losing so much of that land. And it looks like we're losing it to local developers, but if you
Mm-hmm.
follow the breadcrumb trail, most like one company is in Japan and there's another company, these are the parent companies of, so it is happening everywhere. And
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to get political either, but getting
There's
back to your
formulas.
point, which was it's hard to find a person who has that sort of power to be able to
Right.
stand up, who has the empathy to do it.
I believe it's not a person, but it's a body of people, right?
Yeah, you're right.
For example, when the government of Tanzania was talking about putting in a commercial, like a roadway through the Serengeti to allow exports to exit the country faster, there was uproar in unison about this, rightfully so. And this idea of, designated wildebeest crossings, and the president at the time saying we should be equally concerned with the preservation of humans as we are with the preservation of wildlife. You know, okay, but everybody understood because the right question was being asked, right? When he
Right.
said wildebeest crossings, all right, what happens to the migration? How are you going to protect the animals? Surely there's a better way to do this. Yes, we're concerned with the preservation of human beings as well, but how do we do it without putting one party behind, right? The idea isn't to step on somebody else to get ahead. How do you actually find unison? But everybody was asking the same question, whether they said it out loud or not. They were talking about saving the Serengeti, right? Everybody knew that this was about the Serengeti. Everybody understood that this concept of building a road through the Serengeti was going to have issues, and it was going to create consequences that would be felt for lifetimes. It was going to drastically impact the migration pattern. It was going to drastically impact behavioral issues, behavioral movements and whatnot of the herds, which means the predators. It would have changed the food cycle completely in terms of how nature works. It would, and to detrimentally, and probably like more than likely, irreparably.
Hmm.
When you start thinking about this, if the right question is being asked, enough people will stand up for it. I remember one email just saying, "Can you weigh in on this?" And I scrolled down, and it was one talking to the other. And look, I'm honored that they come to me and asking for an opinion. I am. I'm flattered. I'm honored to help here. But the person saying, right off the bat was, "Did you see this article about Tanzania? I am not sending my tourism dollars there. Forget it. I'm not going there." Really? Did you know that if you don't do that, you're making the problem worse? You're not fixing the
Hmm.
problem. You're just accelerating the demise. You're accelerating the demise of the destination and of those people. So you're not fixing the problem. If you do that, you're going to cause those same Maasai to starve.
Yeah, that's interesting, because I think some people do react and say, let's vote with our wallets.
Mm-hmm.
But to your point, that may not
Mm-hmm.
always have the desired outcome.
Unintended
Unintended.
consequences. We talked about this
Maybe
in the
we
last
need to make our podcast change it to unintended
unintended
consequences.
consequences. I agree. I think it makes sense, but it is right. I mean, again, when we turn people into villains, forget about politics. Look, sometime rightfully so. You may still arrive at the same conclusion where they are villains. Fine, then by all means villainize them, but at least go the roundabout way. Go the way and actually do the homework. Do it properly
Hmm.
and go through it and do it properly. I think that's huge in terms of what you do, right? That's gonna be the key. If there's a way to do it properly, and again, that properly means asking the right question. If there's enough uproar because you ask the right question, the answer becomes pretty clear, right? Again, here, I know the topic of this podcast is whose land is it anyway, and that's actually accurate because the question isn't how could you do this? The question is how do we get here? And then it's
Hmm.
whose land is this? Is it your land? Is it my land? Whose land is this? All right. How about we find a way to figure out how it could be both of our lands, right? I know it's utopian that I'm talking about. However, it's not impossible. There are set formulas in place that are being used. There are land conservation trusts that are in place that can be part of a solution. And it's not being applied because there isn't a unified voice. right? I mean,
Right.
we also have to remember this happened during the pandemic. The poorest countries in Africa were being villainized. Oh, you don't have any vaccines. And how come you don't have any vaccines? Do you have any idea how much it costs for them to make these vaccines, to import these vaccines? They couldn't make them. We got them for free because the government actually and the drug companies and whoever else was involved, but we got them for free. That didn't happen in these countries. There was a bill to be paid, and the bill wasn't paid by the people, but it's being paid now
Mm-hmm.
because the money that was borrowed. We didn't have to go that way. We have to remember that we're talking about a core periphery system. We're talking about third world countries. These are among the poorest GDPs, the most fragile GDPs in the economies in the world. The GDP is a fraction of what the US is. Their income is a fraction of what ours are. We have to remember that. So if we go about villainizing one party over the other, we're not fixing the problem. We're actually making it worse. If you tell people, well, I'm not going to send people to Tanzania because of this issue, you are making the issue worse. And then you start having things have come to a head. That becomes part of a problem.
Mm.
So, but you were when you were in the Coast Guard. Actually, this is the way to put it. You obviously went to international waters,
Mm-hmm.
right? It was understood that nobody owns that water.
Right.
Right? It
Right.
was clear
Yes.
that nobody owns that water. It was clear.
Mm-hmm.
There was no disputing it. And if somebody came out of their territorial waters, international waters, and did something that like, was your ship ever provoked in international waters?
Um, I can't remember a time when we were.
Okay.
I know it happens, but no, I can't.
Mhm. But it
I
does happen.
Yeah, oh, for sure. Yeah, it
Right.
happens. It happens
Right.
all the time. And there
Right.
are, yeah, I mean, even today as we speak, there are up in Alaska, especially, there are lots of crazy things going on, out
Yeah.
there with different countries trying to lay claim to parts of, you know,
Alaska, that's not theirs.
right.
But you see how there's clear definitions
Mm-hmm.
on Alaska that, okay, this is not your land. This is not yours.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a pretty, I mean, there's some stuff happening there, but would you say the debate in Alaska is black and white? I don't know enough about Alaska to speak
No,
intelligently
no,
on this.
I don't, no, it's not. And, it depends, whether you're talking about at sea or even if you're talking about up in the interior when, you're talking about oil and you're
Mm-hmm.
talking about, I mean, and I think I don't know enough about Alaska as well to speak knowledgeably either, but I do know it's murky.
Yep.
Hmm.
Yep. Yep. No pun intended. But I think that's exactly where we are, right? I mean, again, something that maybe wasn't defined as properly as it could have been. When again, oil is another one that we're talking about, right? In terms of where who owns the rights to that oil? Why do we go into certain countries? But back to these indigenous communities like the pastoral Maasai and the land that they're on, it again, this conversation has to start with the right question. And the question can't be who's to blame. The question is, how did we get here?
Hmm.
It's not who's to blame. Because honestly, if you look at the current government in Tanzania, if you look at the current generation of pastoral Maasai living on that land, they're not the ones who set this up. It was their ancestors or their predecessors. They're not the ones who wrote this, but they're the ones dealing with it. Right? I mean, when you look at our Declaration of Independence, when you look at our Constitution, yeah, there's room for interpretation, obviously, but it's pretty clear,
Hmm.
right? I mean, from the Bill of Rights to everything else, it is pretty clear in terms of sovereign land, everything else. When you look at any kind of job description for a government official, it's pretty clear. The separation of church and state is pretty clear, right? Does it happen all the time? No, but when it doesn't happen, you could see it not happening. Here, they can't see it happening, right? And that's the thing. So we're going to talk about possible solutions in the next episode. But I do want to say that even here, when a country and again, I'm going to come back to this because this is yet another example of governing finance bodies, international bodies that actually will cause an issue, right? That'll cause an issue in a country. If you are a country who is indebted to world organizations to pay back debt and you have to tax your way out of it, how do you tax indigenous people when they don't pay taxes? How do you tax them? How do you tax people when they're either exempt or this? I think, when you look at certain communities, let's say in Canada and Alaska, some of them are exempt or they get subsidized in their taxes,
Right.
Imagine having to go and tell them they're going to tax you 40% more. How would you do it when you're subsidizing what they're paying? How would you do it? Right? If we take things all the way back, and I'm a big fan of simplest common denominator. I'm a huge fan of that. We know whose land it was. We know what's developed afterwards. So we essentially messed it up. And now we're basically saying, hey, can we borrow 20 bucks? I mean, I hate to simplify it, but that's essentially what we're asking, right? That's essentially what we're saying. Yeah, hey, thanks for giving us the land. Sorry we messed it up. Can we borrow 20 bucks? Like that's essentially what we're asking. Here, again, I'm not railing on international organizations here, but I just wanted to illustrate that point. This really is, I hate to use the phrase silent killer, but that's what it is. I hate to use that point. It's this notion that that you have to tax your way out of it, but you don't know whose land it is. How did we get here? That's so important to understand.
The whole time we're talking about this, I keep thinking about that song. My God, how did we get here? How did I get here? And the days go by.
What I was actually, I was funny yesterday as I was preparing for this. I always do a little bit of just some notes and whatnot, and because I'm a nerd, and so I started thinking of that comedy show, Whose Line Is It Anyway?
Oh, I love that show. Yeah.
So
I was thinking that came to mind as well. Yeah.
Whose land is it anyway? And there's an improv and there's an improv battle that occurs with comedians left and right? So whose land is it anyway? And then all of a sudden it basically it just came out from there. So I don't know why I kept getting images of the actors in Whose Land Is It Anyway coming up on stage and just doing the howdy doody.
Yeah. That's awesome. Well, I'm excited to hear about who's gotten it right.
Yeah. I don't know. Well, I don't know that anybody has gotten it right, but there's definitely some great examples of people that are on the right track to getting it right. It's ideas that they're implementing. Is it a perfect way? Of course not. But you can't have perfect if you have complete failure. You have to have a middle ground first, right? So you can't go from complete failure to complete success. There's got to be a middle ground. So there are some people here, there are some countries who are getting it right. They do have it set the right way, and it comes back to them asking the right question. So yeah, I'm excited because can we record that episode now? Can we do it right now? Can we go? I'm ready. No. You know what? It's going to be exciting because I want our listeners to actually hear this. We're adding a lot of subscribers every month. You've seen this. We're adding the huge numbers, and the fact that all of our listeners can hear us now on pretty much every avenue there is, including YouTube. And I mean, it's the coolest thing to tell your daughter, hey Alexa, and then have them do this and go, hey, check this out. This is your dad. Check this out.
I love that. You're YouTube famous. That's
that's it. That's it. My daughter goes, are you a YouTuber? I'm like, not quite, but I am noticing that we're getting a lot of views.
I like it
on this stuff, but subscribers are what's growing. And so, those of you who are new to listening to us, you'll notice, not every episode is going to be about happy, smiley. Not every episode is going to be about dark and gloomy, but we are going to talk about chain reactions of events that are preempting and that are preventing both, right? They're both preempting a problem and sometimes they're preventing a solution. And sometimes they're causing other things. So it's about understanding, for example, there is somebody who is going to be in this land. The people who are starting to get this right in terms of the solution of whose land is it. They are those locals. They are the ones, those local heroes. They're the ones who started to figure it out. this is how to do this, but there has to be, again, the right question being asked. So
Mm.
to our listeners that are here, this podcast is about giving you thought-provoking ideas. I'm not asking you to agree with us, right? I'm not asking you to agree. You can turn this off and go, what a bunch of idiots. And I wouldn't be offended.
It wouldn't be the first time I've heard that.
Well, that's right. It wouldn't be the
about
first time
me.
for me either. It wouldn't be the first time about me either. In fact, to anybody who does say that, by the way, I always tell them, thank you very much for the motivation. That's all I say to them. Thank you very much for the motivation. Not that I needed any more of it, but thank you. But it is very much the case that, to all listeners, I want to give you thought-provoking ideas. I want to be able to get you to think a bit more progressively or even conservatively, but I want you to get you to think. But I want you to get you to process, and I want you to actually see beyond our walls, beyond our borders, beyond our, I guess for lack of better words, our fiefdom. Beyond that, beyond our silo, these are real issues that are impacting. And what's going to happen is, just like the way you see India climbing up the charts as a powerhouse economically, there is going to be balances of power shifts. There's going to be balances of powers, and going to be seismic power shifts within our globe. And when that occurs, it's conversations like this that we need to be having, because we're going to repeat these mistakes that are being made. We're going to repeat them over and over and over again. And then we're going to stand in front of a microphone and say, never again. Okay. Well, how do you prevent what you don't want to happen from happening?
Mhm.
You have to be able to think critically about it.
That's right.
So this is about thinking critically. It's about giving you thoughts. This is what's happening right now. As of this recording, and it's going to be happening long after this recording is published. It's going to be happening a year from now, and 20 years from now, and 5 years from now. It may not be in the same location, but you want to be the person who actually says, you know what, there's a solution that this country is getting right. Why aren't we applying it here? And I noticed actually, I had somebody come to me the other day. Apparently their son is listening to us now, and he's like 16 or 17.
Oh, cool.
Which I was amazing. A 16-year-old not listening to Drake is pretty impressive.
Yeah.
So he's listening to us. That's
Awesome.
a future leader. And
It
if this podcast gives him any reason to just think critically, awesome. I'm not saying they got to, yeah.
Yeah. But you know what? I think even in your own life, applying these practices in your own life, always asking why and
Thank you
and
for listening
how
to
and
The Sustainable Voice.
as
If you
it
have a
applies to
success
just
story
small
of your
things in
own,
your
please
life,
reach
it's
out
a
and
great
share it
place
with
to
us.
start
Would
with
love to hear from you. See you next
expanding
time.
out into feeling like you can jump into the world and have a say in your own community, and then in your own country, and then in other countries. You build.
Right. Exactly. You build, you build. And it used to be, remember my parents would say, well, you got to make sure you're part of this so you can have intelligent conversations at parties.
Mm.
It's no longer that. It's having these conversations so you can actually impact change. Right? Social media is the biggest way to impact change. We all have the power at our fingertips to do it. I'm not saying to go there and just blacklist somebody and just, ruin their reputation, but you have the power and the voice. I count social media as a megaphone.
It is.
Not to call people out, but to be able to ask the right questions for everybody to hear.
In a constructive, in a way that can be heard. That's
right.
so important, because
That's exactly
if you're
right.
out there finger pointing, without, it takes a light hand and a light approach, I think,
That's right.
to sometimes get your point across. So
Absolutely. Well said.
Cool.
That's a great way to end it.
This was fun.
It was a lot of fun. To all of our listeners, thank you again for listening. Remember, this podcast is about big successes in small places. Be the success in your location.
Indeed. See you next time.
See you next time. Take care.
Thank you for listening to The Sustainable Voice. If you have a success story of your own, please reach out and share it with us. Would love to hear from you. See you next time.